My family lived in Cripes, West Virginia. It was a small, quiet community. We all knew each other. There was mom and dad, me, my identical twin brothers, and my baby sister. We rented the house from a retired school teacher, Mrs. Blagama. And I loved living in that house. It was only a 2-bedroom. It had a huge yard and a long driveway, and I learned to drive a stick shift on a Ford Mustang my dad had bought me. And in the summers, me and my brothers and our friends from Cartwright branch would walk Buffalo Creek Road to Latrobe because that's where the Boy Scout camp was, and it had a big swimming pool.
There was a Boy Scout camp that we visited regularly. Every summer we would camp out, and I knew the groundskeeper, Andrew Johnson. He was one of the people that I knew that got killed in the flood.
Describe life before the flood there. What was it like growing up?
Oh, we have a lot of community kids playing ball, doing those things, playing together, sleighing together. Just in the communities, the neighbors, you had a lot of fenced neighbors there. From one fence there, and you was respectful of all the neighbors because all they had to do is say something to your parents and you was in trouble. You was always Mr. this and Mr. that, and and the neighbors, like I said, they talked back and forth, and all the women talked across the fences, or the swings was always turned. If you noticed on the homes, there were a lot of swings were turned towards each other on the porches so they could talk across the porch, across the swings. Real community, real close. All coal mining people, so they all worked together, most of them did.
I started my teenage years in that house, so there's a lot of good memories. I was 16 years old on February 26, 1972, a sophomore at Mann High School.
Buffalo Creek is in eastern Logan County, with its headwaters near the junction of Boone, Logan, and Wyoming counties. Mining began in the Middle Fork in 1945 when the Laredo Coal Mining Company opened mine number 5. The associated prep plant was completed in 1947. The company began dumping mine refuse from the plant in the mouth of the Middle Fork Valley, eventually creating a large waste bank across the hollow. Then, in 1960, as part of the company's stream pollution abatement plan, a dam was constructed to contain the prep plant wastewater and allow the solids to settle out. The dam was constructed by placing coal refuse across the valley upstream from the existing refuse pile. By February 1972, the waste bank extended 1,500 feet upstream. By late November 1962, Dam Number 1 and the refuse banks are both higher and have progressed upstream. The dam has a maximum crest length of 100 feet, a width of 20 feet, and a maximum height of 140 feet above the downstream toe of the embankment.
Generally what happens with a mining impoundment, coal doesn't come out in a pure coal form. There's rock mixed in it, other elements, this, that, and the other. So the coal is generally ran through a processing plant to isolate the coal out, and part of that is a wash. So it's screening, washing, sometimes chemical added to get flotation for coal recovery. But refuse impoundments are the product of mining coal, washing the coal to make it acceptable to the markets. And then you have, of course, the non-coal particles, which is the coarse refuse. And you have the fines, and that's the runoff the water that's associated with the washing process. And that's mixed with other, clays, other elements that are broken out, other materials that are broken out. and that becomes your what's called refuse or a coal waste product.
Buffalo Mining Company took over the operation in 1964 and in 1966 began constructing Dam Number 2 to replace the pool behind Dam Number 1, which had filled in with silt. Dam Number 2 was located about 600 feet upstream and built on the tailings of Dam Number 1. Following the collapse of a large hillside waste bank in Wales in the United Kingdom in 1966 that killed 28 adults and 116 children as it engulfed a school and a row of houses, the U.S. Bureau of Mines, fearing the same thing might happen in the United States, prepared a list of waste banks in the Appalachians that, due to their location and size, could cause loss of life or property if they failed in a similar manner. The refuse bank at Middle Fork was one of 38 waste banks examined in West Virginia. The examiners concluded that the waste bank at Saunders was stable as far as large slides were concerned, but subject to a large washout from overflow of pool number 1. As Dam Number 2 neared completion in March of 1967, it was overtopped and partially carried away by high water from a snowmelt. Dam Number 1 was also overtopped and partially carried away. A small flood on Buffalo Creek resulted. Inspectors from the West Virginia Department of Natural Resources had warned Buffalo Mining Company of the possibility of a washout on at least 4 previous occasions. The company widened Dam Number 2 by dumping more refuse from the prep plant and installing a 30-inch diameter overflow pipe. Dam Number 2 was completed that December. In February 1968, the company proposed building a third dam upstream from Dam Number 2. Dam Number 3 was built over the sludge of Pool Number 2 by dumping coal waste in piles and then grading it level. According to testimony to the State Commission investigating the disaster, the construction method was, quote, common practice throughout the coal mining regions, unquote, but no engineering plans were ever made for the construction of the impoundment. During the construction of Dam 3, the advancing face of the dam failed, with a major portion of the refuse sinking and displacing some of the sludge on which it was being built. The failure was repaired by dumping more refuse into the slumped area. In June 1970, the Pittston Company acquired Buffalo Mining Company. Dam Number 3 reaches the other side of the valley, but not to its full height or width. Bulldozers raised the dam by leveling piles of dumped coal refuse. About 800,000 tons of coal waste has been dumped to form the dam. Then, in early 1971, roughly a year before the catastrophic failure, along the downstream side of the left abutment of Dam Number 3, a section between 150 and 200 feet wide and 20 to 30 feet back from the face, begins to slump. Black water is observed boiling into Pool Number 2 on the downstream side of the dam, an indication of foundation displacement. The pool level behind Dam Number 3 was 20 feet below the crest at that time. The failure is repaired by filling in the slumped areas. A so-called emergency spillway consisting of a 24-inch diameter steel pipe is placed 7 to 8 feet below the crest.
West Virginia did have a mining program at that stage through DNR, but there were really no regulations on the national level that could be incorporated or any standards. Roughly it was cataloging, inventorying, and then after the disturbance for strip mines only. Deep mines didn't have any regulations associated with them, nor did preparation plants or impoundments under land reclamation. They simply saw the revegetation, the seeding of the downslope mine spoil material, and that prior to Buffalo Creek, that was really the entire hux of the West Virginia mining program.
In the days leading up to the flood, Buffalo Mining Company first became aware of the high water condition behind Dam Number 3 on Tuesday, February 22, 1972. Company officials observed the water level was still several feet below the opening of the 24-inch drain pipe. When they returned on the 24th, the water was seen flowing from the downstream opening of the drain pipe, indicating the water behind Dam Number 3 had risen 2 to 3 feet over the previous 2 days. By that evening, the water level was about 5 feet below the crest of the compacted portion of the dam. And by 4 p.m. Friday, the water had risen another 18 inches. It was raining heavily, and the water continued to rise at a rate of 1 inch per hour. By 3:30 Saturday morning, it began rising 2 inches per hour, then 3 inches. By 6 a.m., the water was just a foot below the crest. cracks began to appear parallel to the dam's crest. According to testimony at the state hearing investigating the disaster, a company official encountered 2 sheriff's deputies downstream at Laredo around 6:20 after he had inspected the dam and told the deputies that, quote, looked all right, unquote. Having spoken to other residents along Buffalo Creek who were still concerned about the dam, the deputies continued to warn residents in the area. Sometime just before 8 a.m., Dam 3 experienced a massive shear failure, releasing the water and causing Dam 1 and Dam 2 to overtop. The failure continued to progress across Dam 3, exposing a breach in Dam 2. A few minutes later, at around 8:05, Dam number 3 suffers a catastrophic failure, releasing a massive flood wave into the narrow valley below, more than 17 million cubic feet of black water.
And there was lots of talk about flooding in several communities. So my dad's brother and his wife brought their 4 children to our house to be safe.
I was 9 years old. I just turned 9 in December of that year. And I remember it quite well because it rained all week. It was really cold. And that morning, it was Saturday morning, and, you know, kids were all wanting it to snow. So we was hoping for snow, but just wet and mucky.
It had rained for 2 or 3 days. I mean, it just poured the rain. So whenever I had gotten home, it was early, probably around 3 o'clock in the morning. I can remember Dad waking me up about 6 and saying, we got to move the cars across the creek. Where we lived on Rome Creek was just over the mountain from Buffalo Creek. So whenever it rained on Buffalo Creek, it rained where we were at. So we had heavy rains and the creeks were swollen. And I got up, we moved the cars across the creek, and that was probably around 6, 7 o'clock.
My dad was a new employee for Sano Railroad. At that stage, he initially started out in the car department. He went to transportation as a brakeman, so he had very little seniority. When the incident actually occurred, he was at what is now the fan coal loadout in Amersdale on Buffalo Creek.
My brothers also had a friend to spend the night. It was a Jude boy from Cartwright Branch. And so there were 9 kids in a 2-bedroom house. So we had kids everywhere. The boys claimed the bedroom, the girls fixed sleeping pads in the living room, and just a whole lot of fun the evening before the flood.
My dad worked in the mine, which was up above where the actual dam broke. So he worked 2 hours. So he didn't get home till like maybe 8 or 9 in the mornings. Well, that particular morning, my mother got up. She was fixing breakfast for everybody, and she had the radio on. So that's where she heard it at.
I was only 3, just turned 3. Dad, it was Saturday morning. Dad was heading down towards Lincoln County, whatever, got down 3 Mile Curve. And this is just what Mom and Dad told me. He turned around and came back home because, you know, he'd heard something was going on.
The name of his engineer was Red Poppell. Guy that lived at West Logan. And he looked at Red Pop, he said, I know we're making money. He said, but my boots are full of water, and that was just from the rain. He said, we need to get this back to the yard at Peach Creek. So they did their last connections, they loaded up, and as it actually turns out, they were at the mouth of Buffalo Creek at Man when the dam broke.
And I remember hearing my dad, and he wasn't working that day, and he worked for Island Creek Coal at Kelly. And I remember him telling Mom in a loud voice, you need to get the kids ready to go.
And there was some kids, some of us kids up in the living room watching cartoons. And Mom was in the kitchen fixing breakfast. She heard cars honking the horns, blowing the horns, going down Buffalo Creek.
My grandparents lived down at Latrobe, and my sister, she's 3 years older than me, she had spent the night with them. And I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly how they got warning that the water was coming.
We woke up and Mom was moving a little slow, because she didn't know what was going on. And Dad said, "Come here and look."
And she went to the kitchen window to see what was going on, and she said it was like a swell of water that was being pushed by the big water. And that swell of water had already started leaving the banks of Buffalo Creek, and she saw the roof of a house in that water, and what she saw was she thought she saw a man holding on to the roof of that house. And so she screamed for Dad. My mom was raised in Saunders, West Virginia, which was the community right below the dam. So she knew the dangers of that dam growing up. And so she knew, when she saw what she saw, she knew that the dam had broke.
And he was showing her the water had already started coming into the yard. We lived at Raleigh, which is about the middle of Buffalo Creek, right above Fanco Loadout. And we, she came, got the kids. There was three of us, me, my younger brother, my older brother, and said, "Get dressed now."
By the time she had got us up and everybody was getting ready to go, it had already broken and the water was already coming down the street.
My uncle, he packed my sister, and I think they had to wade through water to get up to the mountain and get clear, but it completely destroyed my grandparents' house.
We got dressed and got our clothes on, half asleep, and we come out, and it was probably about a foot deep in the yard at that time. Water was. It was black, cold. Of course, it was over our boots.
And I can remember my uncle coming and knocking on the door, telling Dad that the dam at Buffalo had broke, and he was going to go over. He worked for Amherst Coal Company, and he was worked at the tipple, but he was an operator of some of the heavy equipment, so he was going to go over to see what he could do.
There was a bang on our back door, and my dad had answered the back door, and it was the older brother of the younger Jude boy that spent the night with us, and he was frantic, telling my dad that my brother has to come home. Dad said he has to come home now. And so my dad got the younger boy together, and they went off to home, while my mother started gathering the younger kids to get their coats on and shoes on. And then there was another bang at the door, and it was the older Jude boy. He came all the way back to tell us that the dam had broke.
A wall of water 20 to 30 feet tall smashed into the community of Saunders. About 50 people lived there. A dozen homes were washed away, leaving little evidence where they once stood. Eyewitnesses there reported it took a little less than 15 minutes for the entire contents of Dam Number 3, 132 million gallons of water, sludge, and rock, to empty into Buffalo Creek. Saunders was the uppermost of the 17 communities along Buffalo Creek, and the first to feel the deadly force of the water. Between Saunders and Pardee, about a mile below the refuse pile, the valley floor was scoured out to a depth of 5 feet, destroying the road and sections of the railroad track and leaving behind 6 million cubic feet of flood-transported rock, refuse, and sludge. You can see the high water mark on the side of the valley wall. And then downstream through Laredo, through Cranco, Lundale, and Stowe, through Kreitz, Latrobe, and Robinette. Amherstdale, Becko, Fanco, Riley, Brayholme, Acoville, Crown, and Kistler, leaving a path of death, destruction, and devastation.
And it was really odd, to see, because it was black. It was just like a black ocean, because the creek was pretty far from our home. And all of a sudden, the creek was in the home. It was everywhere. And a lot of debris, the fences caught a lot of the debris, kept it from coming into the yards, but all the fences were bending down from brush, trees, cars.
By the time we all got dressed and got ready to leave, the water was already coming down. So the older ones carried the younger ones on the back through the water.
So Mom went on dressing the kids, and she told us older kids to get air shoes and air coats on because we had to move fast. And I couldn't find my coat. And so I was looking everywhere for my coat. So as Mom took all the other kids out the back door, I didn't follow Mom out the back door. I went to the living room to look for my coat.
And we got up to the property above, and that's where most of that community was, in that area. And we got up there, and you could see it, and you could see the whole valley was full of muddy water, and it's just pitch black all the way across. And of course, the mothers had all the kids and together, and they was building fires because it was probably 3-4 foot deep in the houses by then.
And my dad had moved furniture. He had put certain pieces of furniture up on higher pieces of furniture. I guess he had no idea. He just thought there was going to be water in the house. And I remember that he pushed this large console TV across that living room floor and put it on top of the couch. And my dad was a small man, and how he managed to get that couch on that TV, on that couch, I don't know, but he did. And when he did, he put it on my coat. So I was going to the couch to try to pull my coat out from under the TV when he grabbed me and rushed us out the door. So I went out without a coat. And the water from the creek had already run across the road and was in our yard, because I remember getting my feet wet and the bottoms of my pajamas wet. But I don't remember how deep the water was that had already settled in the yard. But Mom had already managed to get the kids across the track and through the bottom and up on the hill. And they were screaming for Dad and me to hurry.
And the railroad track was right behind our houses. So we all went to the railroad tracks, and then we went to up on the mountainside. And we was there because we didn't know where our father was.
Something stuck with me all these years. There was a woman on top of a car floating down, and the men in the camp, my dad and a couple others, they took swing chains off a swing and put them together and pulled her in, threw it out to her and pulled her in from the side. And that stuck with me all these years, her going down and screaming at her. Because once you got out where you could see everything, you could see houses and cars and everything were going down Buffalo Creek, and knew how big it was.
There's a lot of scars, and a lot of people still have a lot of issues with it. Mom told me and Dad told me that they had a neighbor, and she would babysit me and my sister from time to time, and my dad found her, and they just got her a necklace for Christmas, and it was on her, so and she was pregnant, and she lost also a twin son. And the family's good friends. So.
I don't remember how long we had climbed. I don't remember how far we'd climbed. But I remember hearing this big roar of water. And we all turned around, and as we turned around, this huge wall of water hit. Our house was the first in that roll, and so our house was the first hit. And it hit our house and lifted it off the foundation, and it just swirled and just tore apart, and it was swallowed by the water and just joined the rest of the debris. And one by one, it hit every house in that roll and took them all out the same way. And I don't remember this story, but while talking to family members, trying to gather information about what happened that day, the two older girls, my cousins that had spent the night, they were 9 and 6, Trina and Abby Western, they remembered that when I saw that I lost it and started screaming and crying. And they said I just kept hitting my head against a tree trunk until my dad grabbed me and settled me down. And I remember all the kids crying. They were cold and they were wet, and just what we just saw. I don't remember climbing the rest of the climb. I don't remember coming down on the other side of Cartwright Branch, but my dad told me that the creek that ran along Cartwright Branch had also, the water had also made it impossible for us to cross, and that the men had built some sort of makeshift bridge for us to cross. And I don't remember crossing the bridge. I don't remember getting warm, dry. I don't remember where we stayed, how long we stayed. I don't remember getting out of Buffalo Creek, how we got out.
Back then, a lot of people kept horses and cows and hogs and a lot of dead animals. The smell was really horrendous, with the death and everything. And what we found right at the end of our camp, where we had been walking over the debris, they found several bodies there, which we found out later on. And that was pretty disturbing, as a kid, knowing you've been walking over top people was dead and everything.
I had never seen so much devastation, where a railroad track looked like it was a pretzel. That's how the force just twisted it, a whole railroad. I mean, it was just roads that was there, it's no longer there, it's a river running down through it. That's kind of about, I don't know that anybody could actually paint you a perfect picture for what you saw. I don't think you can.
I remember coming back after the flood, and and I don't know why I remember this, but on the kitchen table was sitting a box of Chef Boyardee pizza mix. Then I don't know why that sticks with me, but I remember seeing that the house is flooded, it's full of mud, and there's that box sitting on the table because it's Saturday. Again, Saturday night we're gonna have pizza.
There was just piles of people's lives, their houses, their clothing, their toys, their possessions, all just in piles of debris. And the thing that stuck out most for me was the enormous emptiness of sound. It was just quiet. Just hours before that, there was all the noise of all the destruction, houses and mobile homes and cars and bridges and trees just being banged and clashed together, and now there's just quiet. Like when you put a seashell to your ear, that quietness, it was deafening, the sounds of nothing.
It took 3 hours for the flood wave to reach the Guyandotte River at Man. By that time, it had slowed and spread out, dissipating its energy into the wider part of the valley. The flood took out power lines and phone lines, leaving residents in the dark and out of reach. It's hard to imagine today, with our smartphones and the ability to talk or at least message our loved ones pretty much anywhere in the world, how isolated the folks along Buffalo Creek felt.
You don't know where nobody's at because you have no way of communicating. We didn't have cell phones, So you really was just depending on somebody else telling you anything. Yeah.
What was it like when your dad finally got home?
There's no words to express how much relief and joy once we were actually able to see. Because like I said, we didn't know where he was. We didn't know what happened. We didn't know if he had made it, because like I said, by the time the dam broke and the water came, that was round about the same time he normally gets off work. So, you know, we didn't know. You didn't know anything. So we spent a whole day not knowing where he was, if he was okay. Did he make it? We don't know.
The day that it happened, the people that worked there at Buffalo Mining, they lost total communication with their families. Families didn't know whether if they were in the flood, if they survived or whatever. They told me that they had to climb up on the hillside and walk literally for miles, seeing the devastation that had occurred and that down in the stream below them, and that even to get to some way of communicating with their families that they were okay.
So finally, when my dad got home late that evening is when the water had kind of started trying to go down some, enough that he finally made it home, but he had to walk. So I don't know the exact distance from where it was to my house, but it was a pretty good distance. And he couldn't go straight because half the roads were gone, the railroad tracks were all gone, so him and another of his coworker, they walked the mountainside. And then when they could come down and get a straight shot, that's what they did, and then they'd go back up the mountain and so forth and so on. So that evening, when we finally got a chance to see that our dad was okay and he had kind of got us, he put us all in the car and we tried to leave. Well, we did leave, but we got stranded up on Kelly Mountain because they wasn't letting anybody back in. So you couldn't get in, you couldn't get out, so we ended up having to spend the night in the vehicle.
We didn't know who the survivors were, who was affected. All we knew, and that just from the photographs that you saw on TV, that there's nothing left. So you're just wondering how many people that you actually knew, the boys that you went to the scout camp with, and how many were left. I mean, it does affect you.
What I remember is I heard the phone jingling. I woke up and I saw all my neighbors running all around up there, and I looked out the front door and I saw the water coming. I grabbed the baby and woke up Randy, and we grabbed a blanket and a house coat, and out the back door we went. By that time water was knee deep. We were standing on the tracks and water was going all around us. And
have you been back home?
No, we stayed up there the first night. We stayed in my house. It didn't get hurt. It didn't get in the house, and a lot of people stayed with us. And next door there was 2 houses up there, and we had plenty of food, and we had a fire in our fireplace, and we had some drinking water we were boiling. And then we came out yesterday morning about 8:30. My dad and brother's still up there looking for my mom. We haven't heard anything from her. We heard that she might be over in Madison in a hospital.
On my husband's side, there are 5 gone.
Are they missing, or do you know they're dead?
They've already been identified.
Does it console you at all that
Yeah, they live right above me.
Excuse me?
They live above me.
Does it console you at all that you'll have free housing? Do you think you'll rebuild here, stay here?
I won't move that Holler. I'll never go back up there.
Where will you go?
I don't know.
I just got out of bed and went out here, and it was coming there, and we took across there and went up on the railroad.
Were you sleeping at the time?
Yeah, so my wife waked me up and said there's some stuff going down out there, and we looked out and it looked like houses and all kinds of stuff.
So you didn't have any warning whatsoever?
No.
You got any insurance on any of your property here?
No.
What are you going to do now?
Oh, I don't know.
You're going to stay?
Don't even know that.
How would you describe the spirit of the people, your neighbors, at this point?
Everybody was helping everybody. That's all there was to it. Everybody was grabbing clothing from everywhere they can find it. People were helping other people get in houses, and that's just it.
We had a 2-story house at the time, and we had several neighbors come stay in the up part of the house where it was dry. So we had like 10 or 12 people in each room staying up there and built fires. And then that night, I think about 7 or 8 o'clock, there was a false alarm. And we all had to run out again, out into the cold again, and waited and waited and waited. Of course, nothing happened, but you know, it's just everybody was terrified that it was going to happen again. And we was quite a while getting the cleanup done. I mean, we was probably we stayed in the house. Didn't have nowhere else to go. Now this is in the 70s. You didn't run down the road and go to a hotel or stay, nothing like that. And, you know, it was coal mining people, and the miners went back to work. They went, Dad and all my neighbors went back, and they was running equipment to clear the road, clear the creeks, Island Creek and Amherst. They worked on the area down there, tried to get some remnants where people could travel around. And because the roads were completely gone, the telephone poles were, and there was nothing, no infrastructure at all, nothing left.
It was like a hit and miss. It would hit this house, and then it wouldn't touch the next house. You know, or 2 or 3 houses, it would just totally destroy it, but then there was other houses that it didn't. Mostly everything that I think most people in my community, their problem was kind of like ours. We had a lot of you had a lot of water damage. You had a lot of black water all in your house. You know, you had that kind of thing. You know, and then you have, of course, once you get in it, those houses back then were very low to the ground, so you know, all that silt coming through just built up underneath your house. So then you got to go in, you got to dig all that back out again. So it was kind of like that in my community. We just saw houses kind of move off their foundations some, you know, and then all the debris that came down. Usually Buffalo Creek, in all the years I lived there, it never came out of the banks till then, you know. And we used to have a footbridge that we would cross the creek to go over to catch the bus. Well, it just, with all the debris that came down hitting it, it just totally took that out. So we had no way of crossing over unless we went maybe, I'd say, a mile and a half down, and then you could cross over onto a vehicle bridge to get over to the other side of Buffalo Creek. So that's what we had to do for a long time.
We were relocated. The federal government came in and they found areas of large empty lots, and they developed that to move HUD trailers in. And my family was relocated in a HUD trailer at Green Valley, located in Huff Creek. And I finished high school there, and at some point, I remember they were telling us we had to move. And so everybody started protesting and writing articles, because where were we going to go? You know, where were all these people that, you know, where were we going to go? I mean, we lost everything, and we rented the house that we lived in, and we didn't have insurance on our possessions, so we walked away with nothing.
And I can say to you very frankly, if there is a failure to meet safety requirements in the impoundment, such as broke loose here in this area, why then the Congress can act, and act affirmatively. And that's what we'll do. We won't allow it to be repeated.
Do you say that from your initial flyover that regulations need to be tightened?
I wish I could answer that with, assurance.
Reporters and cameramen were not permitted to accompany Senator Randolph on his tour of the disaster area. It was explained that recovery problems are now critical. They're bringing bodies out from time to time, and it's just felt by the governor's office, which is the office which is refusing to allow the news media into the area today, that it's just too critical a problem. There are approximately 700 National Guardsmen working in the area and 60 to 70 state police, all plan to be here for some time.
And so began the grim task of recovering the dead. By March 2nd, 72 bodies had been recovered. with more to come. Seven of the victims missing and presumed dead, their bodies never recovered. The bodies of three small children, 2 boys and a girl aged between 18 months and 3 years, were found but never identified.
I can remember the Huey helicopters flying over where we lived almost constantly. So, and it was a big thing too, because you're watching the national news. I think it was Huntley Brickley on Channel 3. I mean, to see something local like that on national news, and then you had the local news channels that were covering things constantly. Yeah, it was just amazing.
This is a temporary morgue in Mann Junior High School's gymnasium, where Senator Randolph has come to console the bereaved and the people waiting to find out if relatives of theirs will be brought in here dead or hopefully alive.
One of the most cherished photographs I have is a photograph of my grandmother volunteering at the morgue. It was the picture speaks more words than I ever could, and that was common ground for everybody. So the one thing that makes me very proud to be from Southern West Virginia and from West Virginia as a whole is how we always come together. And I know that's sad, but I saw it then and I still see it every day today. So that's those components. And I remember the watches. Everybody flocking to all the downstream bridges, and just everybody from the community out. And it sounds kind of morbid. They weren't looking to watch a dead body float by. They were out searching in hopes of finding a survivor clinging to a piece of structure.
Crews from private contractors, mine operators, the Division of Highways, the National Guard, and the Corps of Engineers worked to repair roads and bridges. Other relief agencies provided help, and donations of clothing and household items were gathered. 507 homes were lost or demolished. 44 mobile homes were destroyed. Nearly 1,000 houses suffered some degree of damage. Homes marked with a yellow X had been searched and cleared, meaning the bulldozers could move in and smash them before burning. Nearly 100 homes were burned the day this photograph was taken. Smoke from the burning debris lingered over the valley for days. 30 business establishments, more than 1,000 cars and trucks, 10 bridges, all destroyed. The county road and the rail lines serving the valley's coal mines were severely damaged. The Red Cross provided typhoid shots, medication, distributed food and water and clothing, and maintained 5 shelters housing 1,000 people. Property damage was estimated at over $50 million, more than $336 million in today's dollars.
Once the initial surge came down, a lot of private bridges, a lot of railroad crossings, every stream obstruction led to a buildup, and then you had another structural collapse. As it went down, just little mini collapses of water building up and going. And I remember personally the first time I was at Buffalo Creek after the disaster. My daddy took me up, and this was several months later. It looked so serene. It was black, but it was filled over level from hillside to hillside, just with all the debris that washed down and leveled out. And of course, there'd been recovery equipment on it then. But I remember thinking, God, I've never seen this much flat ground in my life. And it was the refuse and the debris had washed down and filled from hillside to hillside on the impacted area. And it just looked massive to me at that stage. Like I said, I was very young. But I remember that distinctly, and I remember the railroad tracks. And I remember the rail steel from the tracks in areas it looked like a pretzel. with that much force of the water coming down and what those people were impacted by. I mean, enough to bend the rail of the railway tracks, to bend the steel. The destruction, yeah, and some places where the water, and knowing now, because I've been back up there and looked at the structures down and understand a little bit more of the mechanics about what happened, but how it missed certain places. And essentially when it came out of the Three Forks area, it went across, hit the hillside, and bounced back. I mean, it was, you had a lot of ricochet action going on. So one house that was clearly in the inundation path could have been missed just because the water bounced off the hillside and shot across the hollow to another house.
A geological and engineering analysis following the disaster found that Dam Number 3 was not built using engineering practices standard in earthen dam construction, that no foundation preparation was done, and no attempt at compaction of the fill material was made other than the occasional grading by bulldozer. The dam was built on a thick layer of sludge 40 to 100 feet deep, a weak material with negligible shear strength, and that the overflow system, consisting of one 24-inch diameter pipe, was inadequate. Also noted was a lack of a monitoring system to warn of structural changes within the dam. The lack of definitive, clear-cut, and enforceable laws regarding the safety of mine refuse banks and impounding structures, both at the federal and the state levels, was cited as a major shortcoming that contributed to the disaster. Numerous lawsuits were filed against Pittston in the years following the disaster. 645 residents settled for $13.5 million, about $13,000 each after legal costs. The state of West Virginia accepted a settlement offer of $1 million after seeking $100 million from the company. Ultimately, 3 separate commissions, federal, state, and citizens, concluded that Buffalo Mining Company and owner Pittston blatantly disregarded standard safety procedures. The disaster brought change to what had been, up to this point, a loosely regulated industry.
So how widespread were the practices that led to the Buffalo Creek disaster at that time? Were there other Buffalo Creeks waiting to happen in other parts of the state or throughout the Appalachian region?
Without question, because there were no regulations on anything. It was simply not even controlled placement requirements for the coarse refuse material that generally was used to impound the water, which were the coal processing fines. And then sometimes impoundments to make up fresh water so you could run the preparation facilities and perhaps provide a source of water needed for the underground mining operations that might be occurring. So it was very widespread throughout eastern Appalachia.
Right after the disaster in 1973, the West Virginia legislature passed and the governor signed into law the West Virginia Dam Safety Act that changed the code to state how owners, operators of dams, coal, non-coal, had to construct and maintain those structures. And then 4 years after that, Congress passed in 1977 the Surface Mine Control and Reclamation Act. And in that federal act, it allowed states the opportunity to obtain primacy of their coal environmental enforcement within their state boundaries if they so choose. And West Virginia was one of those states that passed environmental regulations for coal mining operations. Also, we have the West Virginia Surface Mining Act and the West Virginia Surface Mining Rules that both take into account these coal-related dams. And also we have the West Virginia Coal Safety Dam Rules that are specific to only coal dams themselves that outlines the inspection and enforcement and maintenance and operation of those dams. And some of the things that are in those rules and those acts are inspection and enforcement requirements that our inspectors do.
These things are designed to withstand earthquakes now. And so the care that's given, and it's not all DEP. I mean, we have our partners throughout the federal government, MSHA, some of the best design engineers and some of the most qualified individuals when it comes to dam control structures that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. Our own engineering staff, our senior engineers here that are assigned as our dam control engineers in the region. Each region has one. They work hand in hand with MSHA. The water discharges, that we bring in our counterparts with under the Clean Water Act with EPA. the preparation plants that generate the material. You're getting into our Air Control Act. So there's so much oversight, so much detail that goes into this and review of these permits. And one of the best components we have, I think, in the West Virginia program in particular is our emergency warning plans. And the emergency warning plans are established that as your examinations that are going on routinely, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, full-scale evaluations by qualified engineers. There are designed-in trigger limits to like the phreatic surface within the fill material, decant critical stage construction certifications, a whole host of issues. But there are thresholds that indicate warning signs prior to something becoming a critical, risk of catastrophic failure that kick into place that involves the local EMS, state Homeland Security, everybody. These emergency warning plans, evacuation centers are outlined, triggers that require, procedurally for the evacuation orders to be given on the county level. So there's a whole host of safeguards that are in place, not only in the construction and design of these facilities, but in the event that something should be threatening, to put emergency response in place prior to a catastrophic failure. So, those are things that just, not even thought of, but that's to give you an idea of where the program's evolved to and how much emphasis we placed on it. And I've said even when I was director of the mining program, there's nothing more important that the mining program looks at overall than our response and our obligations related to refuse impoundments. These are Class C structures by definition, most of them are. And what that means is that should failure occur, you can anticipate loss of human life. And there's no component of the mining program that is more important than that aspect of it. So, as far as my personal feelings about it, like I said earlier, it definitely shaped who I was, why I do what I do. And I think it's the most important aspect of what the mining division does under the DEP umbrella.
The road up Buffalo Creek is a lot smoother and straighter than it was back in '72. Apart from the memorial signs, there's little to suggest anything bad ever happened here. And while the scars have faded from the landscape,
the flood changed a lot of us as far as, staying in the area. I left after graduation. I don't think it really had nothing to do with the flood, but just it was kind of nice to get away from, to be honest with you, and move somewhere else. Because of all the pain and everything we went through in the area, it was a painful thing, and a lot of people who didn't go through it, we felt like everybody else didn't understand.
Even years after it was all said and done, every time we get a lot of rain for a long period of time, everybody got really nervous and jumpy. Even though we were told there's no way that was gonna happen again, there was no way they could do that legally anymore. But when you go through something like that and you see what it caused and all the damage and the destruction that it caused, it makes you a little jumpy when you know that it's done rained for days. What if this happens again, I didn't know, only person, I knew one lady, she was a teacher. Her and her husband had gotten out of their house, but they went back to go get a pet, and they didn't come back. They didn't make it out. That was the only person that I knew personally that had perished out of all the people that did. So, it took a long time. It took a long time.
I've got a sister and a sister-in-law that still live in Green Valley. And, like on Christmas or holidays, I might drive to Green Valley to see them. But no, I don't go to Buffalo Creek. Not that I have anything, there's just no purpose to it.
We stayed there and I graduated from school there. So I seen all the changes. New road, city water, city sewage, all that was changed by the flood, when the flood came. It's a completely different area than what it was back in the 70s, you know, and it changed a lot of people. Some people left, a lot of people didn't stay, you know, because of it, and we stayed through it. And I think back on it, you know, there's a lot of people that I never seen again after the flood. You know, the kids I grew up with and things like that. So it changed a lot of lives. And the flood itself was one of those things which, you know, just stays with you, you know. And I think as far as you know, it changing me, it made me appreciate life a lot more.
People can have disagreements, but when something happens down home, you know, people's there to help. If somebody's house is damaged in one way or a fire or whatever, there's people who reach out and help you. And you know, when someone passes, you know, you better get ready because food's coming to your house. You know, the people just really put their arm around each other. It's a tight community. And again, I'm proud from being from Buffalo Creek, little community of Lundale.
A lot of laws have been changed because of the Buffalo Creek flood. A lot of things are made better because of the Buffalo Creek. You lost a lot of lives, but the laws we got today, most of those come on impoundments and things because of the Buffalo Creek flood, because of what happened. And you know, when I go out and do enforcement and everything, I think about that all the time. You know, people died, so we would have these laws. You know, and you know, what they did at that time was no different than anybody else. It caught up. It caught up with them, and that's why I tell people every day now, these laws are for a reason. The reason, and that's why, you know, the flood, the UVB, all these things that's happened. There's reasons for those things. There's a reason for the laws we got, and usually there's a death attached to it. I'm really thankful, you know, to God for, you know, getting me through the flood. My family didn't lose anybody, and I think about it all the time that, you know, it could have been one of us. One of us could not have made it out.
I think it made everybody take stock in what was really important to them. And I think it made the community realize how much we need each other. And I think that for a lot of people that went through it, they couldn't stay there. It was so traumatizing to them that they left and they never came back. But for the ones who stayed, I think it brought us all a lot closer to each other to actually make sure we all look out for one another. And that's why I brought my kids back, to raise them there. Those who lost family members was in worse shape than the ones who didn't, but you could always find someone willing to lend you a hand or listen to you. Just talk, you know, anytime you need it. And that's the community that I will always call home. Because no matter where I live, no matter where I go, that will always be home. And my children, it's home for them. And that's what they call it, home. You know, so it's been enlightening to know that you can go through a trauma and come out and be a better person once it's said and done. Because all the blessings that you get to get through it, it's the same blessings that carries you forward.